He filed transfer papers to take the company out of my name while I was in the emergency room. He sent them to the bank, to our lawyer, and to an investor I'd trusted. He signed my name, wrote over our incorporation documents, and tried to have the board vote me out without calling me. The man was my co-founder, my roommate for 3 years, the person I'd learned to reach for when I had a bad dream. He did it because he wanted control. It hurt because he made every intimate and professional promise into a lever he could use against me. We had built EchoMint together. He was called Jonah on paper, but at home I called him John. We started in a small loft above a laundromat in Brooklyn in late 2016. I coded. He sold the idea. I kept the servers, the contracts, the spreadsheets, everything he called boring back office stuff. We raised a $1.2 million seed round in 2018. He took the pitch stage and the headlines. I kept the product running and the payroll paid. Our cap table listed me as 35%, him as 40%, and the rest split between early staff and angels. We were a balanced mess of optimism and debt. The imbalance was always there, quiet at first. He liked big gestures, dinners with investors, one-line emails that read like commitments. I liked accuracy. He told me where to stand and who to meet. He kept me in the loop about fundraising, but not about the lines of credit he'd taken out in both our names. He had started using our company card for personal travel, then for a consulting fee that disappeared into an LLC he controlled. We argued about it once at midnight on a kitchen floor that smelled of takeout. He promised he'd fix the books. I believed him. For years, the pattern was simple. He would make a move that got us attention. I would clean up the consequences. He brought in an angel who wanted to acquire our data pipeline. I negotiated the contract language. He signed a freelance agreement, and we later learned the freelancer was a shell company that funneled money to a friend. He pressured me to sign off on invoices, and I did, mostly because rejecting his requests dragged our momentum into the slow lane the investors feared. We had obligations, payroll, a landlord who did not care about vision, and an engineering team of 7 who relied on monthly direct deposits. The startup could not pause while we argued. That dependence is the kind of leverage that does not show up in term sheets. The escalation began in earnest sometime in 2020. It was a series of small, precise pressures expanding into a net. First, he started limiting who could access the company bank account. He said it was for security, a password consolidation, a cleaning up after our growth spurt. The next week I tried to pull payroll and my access failed. He told HR it was a temporary change and to expect things to be handled. People still got paid, but the message was clear. He controlled liquidity. Then he began to exclude me from investor conversations. He would posture on calls and then send me a short email. Take a look and sign where needed. The emails were benign in tone. The documents were not. That same year, our office lease was up for renewal, and Jonah insisted on signing a longer, more expensive lease under an LLC he had registered. I asked why, and he said, "It's cleaner for taxes." I asked to see the formation documents. He insisted it was paperwork for the landlord and waved me away. I didn't notice at the time that this let him funnel a portion of our tax credits and build out reimbursements into the LLC and out of the company's books. The company was still paying for the build out. The LLC collected reimbursements. The sums were small at first, $12,000 here, $23,000 there, But patterns compound. The second loop came when he started introducing a consultant to help with fundraising. The consultant produced an invoice for $48,000 that left our payroll account, like a thief in daylight. Jonah said the consultant's connections would close the next round. I asked for references. He rolled his eyes and said I was being paranoid. I let it slide. The consultants did not close any rounds. We started to run monthly deficits. I worked nights reconciling spreadsheets, moving money between accounts to ensure the engineers were paid. I learned to live by a new rhythm, reassure the team, patch the books, smile in meetings. He smiled too, in a different way, broad and confident. The grin of someone who knew how to make the public narrative look shiny. Escalation accelerated when an investor filed for a board meeting in October 2021. He claimed he had been misled about my involvement in day-to-day operations and proposed a restructuring of executive responsibilities that would name him interim CEO and remove my title as COO. He invited me to the meeting. The meeting invite was vague. He called me the morning the notice landed and asked me not to attend because mood would be bad. He said I should rest, that our lawyer would handle it. I should have gone. At the meeting, our lead investor presented a redacted slide deck, documents that painted me as hands-off and him as driving growth. He produced an email that had my name attached, but was drafted by someone else. A ghost email intended to convey my endorsement of revenue numbers that were not true. I learned later that he had ghost-written investor updates and CC'd a select group so the paper trail looked authentic. The board voted to give him unilateral signatory power over bank transfers above $25,000. I was stunned. I asked for the vote minutes and received a single sentence. The document did not note my objections. The board had accepted his framing. After that, the tactics shifted toward pressure and humiliation. He began to text investors privately with stories about my stress and unreliability. He invited journalists to meet him without me and told them our vision needed a single public face. Employees noticed the change in tone and started asking me privately whether I planned to step back. I told them no. I told them I planned to keep building, but the public image, the curated Instagram, the glossy quotes in trade outlets, made it look as if I had already stepped back. People who had once asked for my technical insight now deferred to him. Sitting in my empty office after we let a salesperson go, I realized the story he was telling had weight. He began to siphon equity through options, backdating games, and phantom stock promises. He used a clause in our employee option pool that allowed phantom allocations to third-party consultants. He assigned phantom shares to an account controlled by his LLC, then promised those allocations to new hires as incentives that were easily rescinded. The new hires left quietly when the options never materialized. I watched the pipeline of talent dry up. I sat in interviews with candidates who later told me they preferred roles offered by our competitors because our paperwork looked sloppy. Papers matter to people building careers. By the spring of 2022, cash was tight. He had convinced the board to take a short bridge loan of $400,000 from a regional lender. The loan required a personal guarantee from one of the founders. He nominated me. He told me it was the right thing. You're the one who actually monitors the books. I pushed back. He said I knew the finances better, that if I signed, we could secure the credit line at a favorable rate. I signed because employees needed pay. The loan sat on the company balance sheet as a corporate liability, but with my signature singled out as guarantor. He said later he had arranged the paperwork so that if anything happened, the lender would file against founder guarantees only rather than company assets. I did not read the fine print. The lender called every month. 2 small betrayals turned into a crushing weight when, in July, Jonah arranged a side agreement that I discovered only because I asked for a bank statement as part of year-end reconciliation. A transfer of $150,000 had left our account in 3 separate wire transfers labeled consulting services, the same amount listed on an invoice from the LLC. I confronted him in the kitchen. He told me the money would return. He said it was an advance. He said we were short on runway and that he'd bridge it personally. I told him to promissory note. He shrugged, said it would complicate things. Trust me, he said, and I wanted to. The first consequence was immediate. Our lead recruiter quit, and the operations manager applied for a job in Boston. The office felt hollow. The sense that everything could be broken with an email began to press on me like humidity. The second consequence unfolded more slowly. The lender started sending notices that the loan covenant tied to founder guarantees triggered a review because our cash balances dipped below thresholds. I called our investor and asked for bridge assistance. The investor's answer was a company PR. We're confident the team is aligned. The investor had been told we were aligned. He had not been told how close we were to a banking covenant breach. He had not been told that the company's signatories were now effectively a single man. The pressure mounted. Jonah started to impose unilateral hiring freezes. He began denying vendor payments if I did not sign off on narratives he wanted to present to the press. He told the office manager I was responsible for payroll errors. At a staff meeting, he suggested I take a leave for health reasons and referred to my hospital records, which he had no right to access, but somehow had. Employees shifted in their seats. A senior engineer asked me softly if I planned to fight. I did not know the shape of the fight anymore. I was exhausted and the company was gasping for oxygen. The low point arrived in the winter of 2023. It was not a dramatic scene with slamming doors. It was the slow removal of things that had mattered. Our office landlord sent a notice that the security deposit refund application was being contested by the LLC Jonah controlled. The accountant called to say our audit showed revenues overstated by $240,000 across 2 quarters. An employee filed an anonymous complaint citing misuse of company funds. The board called a special meeting and, without my presence, appointed Jonah as sole signatory and interim CEO with authority to negotiate an exit for investors. I learned later that he had produced a resignation letter that I allegedly wrote during a breakdown. The resignation was time-stamped at 2 a.m. The night I had been at the hospital for dehydration. The signature looked too neat. They froze our bank account the next week, pending an investigation. Payroll was delayed. People went without paychecks for 2 cycles. I watched 7 people walk out the door with boxes of monitors, hugging me awkwardly and whispering, "I'll be fine." I remember sitting on the empty conference table, holding the original certificate of incorporation that I'd framed on my wall and wondering how ink could be twisted into a noose. I felt abandoned, not by investors necessarily, but by the idea that any of the promises we made to each other had permanence. The day I thought I would lose everything, house, company, reputation was a quiet Wednesday in January when I opened my email to a single message from an address I did not recognize. It was messy, a forwarded thread between Jonah and one of his contractors. He had accidentally CC'd me. It was the kind of error that comes from using the wrong alias in a rush. The thread contained a PDF, an unsigned promissory note, and an internal spreadsheet. The spreadsheet listed liabilities and the names of external accounts. At the top was a line item: Jonah personal guarantee, $380,000. Lender, Harbour Bank. Next to it, in a cell that should have been private, was a note: if forced to give up shares, assume debt in exchange for full transfer of Jonah Co. LLC shares to EchoMint. I read it again to make sure I wasn't imagining the words. The error was tiny. He had written assume instead of assign. The document showed his contingency plan: transfer the LLC assets and phantom shares back to the company in exchange for me signing a debt. Assumption: this was a leverage map, an outline of how to swap liabilities and equity to give him clean exits and me the burden of payment. The spreadsheet also revealed emails that confirmed the transfers had been prepared but not yet submitted. It revealed a single line where Jonah had typed, as a reminder to himself: get signature from Sam, use health leave as reason why not present. I held my breath. The error was a mistake, but it was also the opening I had been waiting for. It altered the legal facts in a way I could use. I printed the thread, I sat on the floor of my apartment and read it until my eyes hurt. For the first time in months, the picture on the inside of my head loosened. This was not just my version of events. There was paper. The turning point did not feel like triumph. It began with a call to our lawyer. I asked her to look at the thread and tell me what it meant. She replied with a measured voice: it's messy, but it's something. She suggested we could use the document in settlement talks. We could offer to take on Jonah's personal guarantee in exchange for immediate and irrevocable transfer of his shares and all LLC assets. She warned me about bank reactions. Harbour Bank might accelerate the loan when they learned the guarantor was transferring obligations. She told me a judge would want to see an evidentiary record. We started pulling everything: emails, bank statements, UCC filings, the phantom stock ledger. I remember the day I walked into Harbour Bank's regional office with a thick manila folder and a face that did not tremble. I asked to speak with the loan officer who handled our account. He was a woman named Carla who had been polite on the phone. She listened while I laid out the mistake Jonah had made and the spreadsheet that showed his contingency plan. She did not promise the world. She said they would need to verify exactly who had guaranteed what. She asked me if I planned to assume the guarantee. When I said yes, the air in the office changed. Suddenly, I was the person who had to supply a plan to pay, and the bank wanted collateral. I could have walked away. I could have refused to take on the debt and let the company be liquidated. That would have preserved my personal safety, at least for a while, but it would have meant layoffs, the end of a product that had customers relying on us to protect their data, and the erasure of years of work. I sat on the bank's worn-on couch and considered what mattered. I thought of the engineers who had returned my calls in the middle of the night when something crashed. I thought of the old woman at a small non-profit who used our tool to manage volunteers and had called to thank me the week before. I thought of a line in our incorporation documents where we'd promised something to each other that had nothing to do with headlines, to build something useful. I signed the papers in late February. I assumed Jonah's $380,000 personal guarantee. I took the loan onto my shoulders, transferred his LLC interest in the office lease back to the company, and received in return a clean transfer of his EchoMint shares to me and an executed resignation that removed him from all managerial roles. It was an ugly paperwork swap. He signed because he preferred to walk away without lenders on his back. He needed quick distance. I needed control. The settlement said nothing about friendship. Taking the debt was not glamorous. It meant cash forecasts that made me dizzy. It meant meeting with Carla at Harbour Bank to renegotiate covenant terms and agreeing to a monthly repayment plan that left little room for growth. It meant I could not travel to pitch VCs without the weight of a line item in my pocket. It meant I had to put my house on the line as collateral for a portion of the loan because the bank required security beyond the company assets. I tightened my personal budget down to what I called engineer-level austerity. No vacations, no new tech toys, meals cooked and frozen, a stricter commute. At night, I made spreadsheets with red and green cells to track monthly burn and principal amortization. It felt intimate and exhausting in a way that public fundraising never is. The immediate consequence at work was predictable. When the settlement became public, Jonah posted a terse message that he was pursuing new ventures. Some investors breathed a sigh of relief that the leadership question had an answer. A few employees came back, a few did not. We negotiated partial payouts to those who left, using the last of our reserve. I sat down with the engineering team and said quietly, "I signed for this company because I believe it matters." No one hugged me. They nodded. That was enough. Longer term, taking on the debt forced me to change the company in ways that were overdue. I reoriented EchoMint away from vanity metrics and toward revenue. We trimmed features that were not paying customers and concentrated on product lines that had stable monthly income. We raised smaller revenue-based financing deals and restructured vendor contracts. It was practical, unromantic work. It was also work I could do without anyone's permission but my own. I reclaimed relationships I had let fray, our accounting firm, our head of customer success, the cleaner who had opened our office at dawn for years. We rebuilt trust, like small, careful bridges over a river that had once surged. Emotionally, the consequences were more complicated. I lost my apartment to a landlord who did not see a difference between a homeowner and someone who signed a guarantee. I stopped answering Jonah's calls. He sent messages asking if I would meet to talk. I did not reply. Part of me wanted to berate him, and part of me wanted to understand why he had done it. But understanding is not the same as forgiveness. The thing he had used against me had been my willingness to believe him. I did not have that well to draw from anymore. I did, however, discover a strange freedom in ownership of the debt. Owning someone's debt means you also own the capacity to decide how to pay it back. I structured payments in ways that allowed us to continue hiring slowly and to protect critical infrastructure. I sold off the seldom-used server cluster and negotiated a lease buyout for the second-floor office that had been a recurring black hole. I started a side consulting practice to keep cash flowing through the company during crunch months. It was not clean, it was not heroic, it was necessary. The relationship with Jonah dissolved into intermittent legal motions and a few terse emails. Once, months after the settlement, he reached out to say his life felt empty. He asked if I wanted to meet for coffee to close things. I imagined the kind of closure people write about in articles, a neat bow. I declined. Closure starts with accountability and ends with repair. I did not see repair, only a man who had preferred to manipulate paper rather than accept consequences. The bank received the monthly payments I had agreed to. The engineers kept shipping features. People started to trust what our product did again. On the other hand, the personal cost lingered. My credit score dipped for a while. I had to explain the situation to new landlords and to an insurance broker who had questions about the company's financials. I watched my name appear in court filings and felt the prickle of embarrassment that accompanies public records. I had to rebuild socially. People are often brittle around failure and entangled stories. But there was also a tacit respect from other founders who had seen our arc and reached out with practical advice. I learned that people who survive corporate betrayal do not need adjectives to describe how they got there. They need systems. 2 years out, EchoMint survives. It is smaller in headline terms, but steadier in daily function. We service a core group of nonprofit clients who power their operations with our tools. Revenue is modest but recurring. We brought on a new COO last year, someone with experience in lean operations, and that helped take weight off my shoulders. The bank renegotiated terms again when they saw a steady repayment history. I still hold Jonah's personal guarantee as a curious artifact of a moment that could have ended everything. I could have pursued civil fraud, more aggressive litigation that would have put every dollar we had into legal fees. I chose instead to accept a settlement that let the product live, even if it meant my personal balance sheet bore the cost. There is no neat revenge story here. I did not humiliate him publicly or execute a dramatic cinematic takedown. What happened was quieter, a slow structural reclamation. I traded my sleep, my small comforts, and parts of my privacy for the right to continue. I paid that price because the company had obligations that extended beyond the two of us. That decision haunts me when I am alone and comforts me when an email arrives from a client who says the product saved them a week of work. It is not a tidy moral. It is an accounting. Even now, parts of me are reluctant to speak about it. Confession is dangerous in a field that values confidence. But I learned 2 things that I never expected to become aphorisms. 1, paperwork has teeth. 2, trust is an asset you must treat like capital. I do not say that to moralize. I say it because the next time I meet someone pitching enthusiasm without detail, I pay attention to the fine print. There are practical outcomes that followed the settlement. I no longer serve as the public face in investor broadcasts. I chose to let our head of growth take that role. I sit at the table and push for product decisions and for fiscal discipline. We hired an external audit firm and implemented a 2-signatory rule for any wire over $10,000. We created a whistleblower line and a simple, transparent ledger for phantom shares. Those measures are not anecdotes, they are safeguards. Emotionally, the settlement meant the end of what I thought of as partnership in the personal sense. People talk about starting companies with friends and lovers like it's an ideal. It's not always. Shared bedrooms and shared spreadsheets complicate how you see someone when the work goes bad. I am careful now with alliances. I do not move in with co-founders. I read documents. I ask for receipts. It's not romantic. It is survival. If there is any quiet satisfaction, it's not in having his debt on my ledger. It isn't the fact that EchoMint survived the worst of human choices and lived to serve a few thousand users who rely on it. I lost some things, a relationship, the naive sense that technology would inoculate us from base behavior, a tidy life. I gained others, an operational muscle, a set of policies we now consider non-negotiable, and the respect of colleagues who saw me stay. The cost was real. The settlement did not feel like victory. It felt like taking responsibility for something that, for better or worse, I had helped build. Months after the agreement, I found a postcard from our earliest investor tucked in a drawer. It had a handwriting that said, simply, "Don't let the small, desperate things make you small." At first, I was irritated that anyone would reduce months of legal paperwork to a slogan. Then I read it again and realized he had meant something else. Not to abandon integrity in the face of pressure. I keep the postcard because it reminds me that the decisions I made were not vanity. They were practical. They had cost me comfort and bought time. I tell you all this not for pity and not for drama. I tell you because betrayal is not always cinematic. Sometimes it is a spreadsheet with the wrong name in one cell. Sometimes it is a series of small misdirections that accumulate into a betrayal large enough to topple people. I tell you because I think there are people who will watch this, who are sitting in meetings where the narrative is being rewritten without them. Read the papers. Keep copies. Don't assume kindness is permanent. If you watched this far and felt the tension, I'm glad you spent this time with me. If anything in my story resonates, if you've ever been edged out or asked to sign something that made your stomach drop, leave a like. It helps small creators like me keep telling these longer stories. If you want to hear more about the practical side, how we tightened our financial controls, or how I negotiated with the bank, subscribe. And if you have your own story or a question about what I did, leave a comment. I read them